Здравствуйте, это программа «Перша, студия» на Першей. И у меня в гостях Дэвид Солсбери, а меня зовут Екатерина Булавинова, я медицинский эксперт детского фонда ООН ЮНИСЕФ. So, hello, David. Thank you very much that you agreed to come to this program. And just for everybody to understand who are you, I would ask you to show all your hats. So, who are you, David Solsbury?
Who am I? Well, until recently, I was the director of immunization in London, where I was responsible for the national immunization program for the United Kingdom. But I also do a great deal of work for the World Health Organization, and I am the chairman of the European Region Certification Commission for Polio Eradication. I'm a member of the Global Certification Commission, and I also work for the Eastern Mediterranean and Southeast Asia. So I have a lot of involvement in polio eradication. I also work with the Centre for Global Health Security at Chatham House in London, which is a think tank where we consider issues relating to health and security on a worldwide basis. So those are some of the things I do.
I feel almost intimidated, intellectually speaking.
Please don't be.
So you came to Ukraine because we have an outbreak of polio in Ukraine. Can
Correct.
we say that this is a security issue, or not so much?
Yes, of course it is, because the security of the health of the citizens of Ukraine is put at risk by a polio outbreak. So it's not just a disease, it is an issue of national health security.
So the issue on how the country responds to the outbreak, basically it's a part of how the country can respond to any kind of security challenge. Can I put it like this or not?
I think that's fair. If you have a system that allows you to respond rapidly and effectively to a health challenge, then that is acting in the interests of the citizens, and you would imagine it would be a similar competence to respond to other security challenges. Health is just as much a security issue as other conventional security threats.
So the outbreak was documented and declared in August in Ukraine, the outbreak of polio. How would you, as a member of all the independent committees on this issue, how would you evaluate governmental response up to this point?
Well, I was asked that question in October at a meeting in London, and I said that the response had been far too slow, and by international standards, this was very poor. The response should have been much more rapid, on a much larger scale, and much more effectively implemented, and that was in October. And here we are in December, and things have not got much better.
You sound pretty tough, I have to say, and I have to say that I am kind of glad that you can allow yourself to sound that tough as independent committee. So it shows me the independence. So do independent committees really exist in the world where experts can allow themselves to say whatever they want?
Yes, they do exist. I have considerable experience at a national, regional, and at a worldwide global level of committees made up of independent people who are prepared to give hard advice when it is the right advice to give. I have done that myself on many occasions, and I am very comfortable with giving tough advice if it is, in my view, the right advice. I am very aware that I'm a guest in this country, but that doesn't stop me from saying what I believe is true.
And we are very grateful for you for that. And may I ask you, why polio? Why there are so many committees around polio, so much money put in polio? Why not some other children infectious disease? Why polio?
Well, they do exist in other infectious diseases, and it's not as if it is only polio that has this attention. Other infectious diseases are also given considerable attention with many committees. The issue about polio that makes it different is that we are trying to eradicate polio from the world. We have looked very carefully over many years at the potential to get this virus out of our existence so that it is not a threat anymore to our children and our grandchildren, and the virus has gone. And all of the scientific analysis tells us that if the right things are done, we could eradicate polio. We have eradicated smallpox. We don't vaccinate anymore against smallpox. That virus has gone. It's not a threat to us. We could do the same for polio. And we are trying to get rid of polio on a global basis. And now there are only 2 countries left in the world where the wild virus is circulating. And those are Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the rest of the world has managed to stop the wild virus. But if your program is ineffective and you don't vaccinate enough children, the vaccine virus can spread in those special circumstances. And that poses a threat to our ability to eradicate polio. And for quite a few years, we have known and we have warned that Ukraine was at risk. We have warned that if the wild virus came into Ukraine, you would have an outbreak. And the size of that outbreak could be very large. And we have warned the government of Ukraine for several years. The European Regional Commission has warned the government of Ukraine that this could happen. And we also knew that this different sort of virus, the vaccine virus, in special circumstances, like have happened in Ukraine, could cause an outbreak. So, sadly, what we warned about has happened.
So your prediction came to be right, absolutely.
Absolutely. And this threatens the ability to eradicate polio on a worldwide basis. So it has to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with professionally, promptly, effectively, so that this risk stops.
In the outbreak response, and not only in the outbreak response, but in the routine program, we see the following problem with the medical professionals, that they are sort of like miscounseling, if I may say so in English, the patients, giving patients not the true information about evidence-based, about science, medicine. Is it a global trend, or what is the global trend in trust or mistrust in immunization? What is the British trend and global trend?
Well, it's hard to talk about a global trend and a particular national trend. But certainly in the United Kingdom, we have a lot of research where we have gone year after year to parents and asked them, who do they trust? And the answer that comes back time after time after time, every time, is that the most trusted is your own doctor. The nurse and the doctor, who are those providing your healthcare, are the ones that you trust the most. So if your doctor is giving you good advice, that the best thing that you can do is to vaccinate your child, then you trust that advice and you do that. And even in the UK, the family doctor is more trusted than the government. So if the family doctor says, have this vaccine, I gave this vaccine to my child, have this vaccine, you will do that. But if the family doctor says, don't have this vaccine, I wouldn't have this vaccine, I wouldn't give this vaccine to my child, or if the family doctor colludes with the parent to create a reason not to give the vaccine, then you follow that advice.
Did you ever have problems with doctors in UK of saying not have this vaccine or not have that vaccine?
Yes, we did. We did. And we've had that on a number of occasions over the history of vaccines, right the way back to the very early days of vaccination 200 years ago. It has happened in my country. But we have overcome those circumstances when they have happened, and we've overcome them essentially by communicating to the local providers, communicating to the doctors, communicating to the nurses, so that they have the right information and they can give the right information to parents. And when the doctors have the right information and they can speak with confidence, then the parents follow that advice. But if doctors try to fantasize about contraindications that are not true, then they create problems. A doctor who does not vaccinate potentially does much more harm than a doctor who does vaccinate.
And Ukraine is vaccinating against 10 infectious diseases. And in Great Britain, as far as I understand, it's bigger. The program is bigger.
Yes, that's true.
So how these decisions were taken to move more vaccines into the program? And was it easy? Was it difficult? How public, was it a public discussion or it's always scientific discussion?
The process is public insofar as all of the deliberation of the National Committee are made public. The process is public insofar as the public are invited to send in their views. When a decision is imminent from the committee, they invite the public to send in their comments. So there is a consultation where the public can make representation. What happens is that the epidemiology is reviewed very carefully. That is, all of the detail of the disease and its consequences. So how many cases there might be, what the complications can be of those cases. And then what is done is to review all of the available data on the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine that is under consideration. And then the health economics are looked at. Is this program going to actually be a good use of money? Because money is not a bottomless pit in any culture. And even in the most sophisticated of environments, you have to be sure that the money that you spend on one health intervention is a better use of that money than spending it on another intervention.
Is there something which you don't have in Great Britain from vaccines, but which you would like to have, but the money wasn't there for that?
I think that at the moment, all of the vaccines that were under consideration have been funded and introduced. The most recent, which was the meningitis B vaccine, was indeed difficult because the economic analysis was not entirely favorable for the introduction of that vaccine. But all of that was reviewed, and there were negotiations done with the company that was supplying the vaccine, and eventually the decision was made, yes, to introduce the vaccine. But I think it is an appropriate way for a government to behave, to consider the economic consequences of vaccination. And if the economic consequences are favorable, in other words, the vaccine doesn't just prevent cases, but it's a good use of money to prevent cases, then those vaccines should be used.
And what is the coverage for the moment in Great Britain?
Well, currently the coverage of our vaccines is higher than it's ever been. The coverage of our routine vaccines, the diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, polio, those are between 95–99% everywhere in the country. The coverage of MMR, measles, mumps and rubella vaccine is higher than it's ever been, and that's getting close to 95%. And in some parts of the country it's above 95%. The introduction of our new vaccines, we vaccinate people who are older people, for instance, against shingles. And the coverage of that is already probably amongst the highest. We went straight in at over 50% coverage of the older age group. For influenza vaccine, for individuals who are 65 and over, coverage is 75%. So for those sorts of vaccines, we're very good. We vaccinate our girls against the vaccine that causes cancer of the cervix, and we have probably the highest coverage in the world, with coverage of our schoolgirls close to 90%. So our program currently, I think, if I had to give a school report, the program is in good health.
In Ukraine, we quite often are in the problem like this. We have big scientists, Ukrainian scientists, who are not in favor of vaccination and who speak about it openly. We have teachers of universities who are not in favor of vaccinations. And we have different professions like neurologists, for example, or surgery people or cardiologists, who are not in favor of vaccinations and think that all different conditions are contraindications. And how to deal with all of that? How to proceed?
Difficult, because everybody is entitled to their opinion. But being a cardiologist makes you an expert on hearts. That does not make you an expert on vaccines. Cardiologists should stick to hearts. And they should be very careful about giving their views on something that they do not necessarily have the right expertise. And they should be challenged. And when a cardiologist wants to give a view on a vaccine, they should be challenged by someone who knows about vaccines, about the basis of their opinion. Now, anyone can have an opinion, but being a doctor does not make you an expert on everything. There is a sort of view that doctors know everything about everything that is medical. But it's not true. And cardiologists may be fantastic about things relating to the heart, but they should stick to things relating to the heart. And when they come out with opinion, their opinion is no better than any person in the street on a vaccine. They should be challenged and asked to defend their case. And if they are unable to do so, they should be politely asked to stick to hearts.
And when you say they should be challenged, the only way I see how they should be challenged, if some type of evidence is used, to protect this or that opinion. The whole concept of evidence-based medicine is not so well digested in Ukraine.
But your cardiologist will be using evidence to justify his or her behavior where cardiology is concerned.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
I would hope yes. But that doesn't mean that they bring the same intellectual rigor to their opinion on vaccines.
But my question is, from what times and how the whole evidence-based concept became integrated into British medical system? When doctors started to say this phrase, this is evidence which is backing up my opinion?
I think that's happened for a long time. Certainly in the field of vaccines and immunization, it's been many, many years.
Like
since
20, 30?
Oh, easily 20, 30 years, where we would have to be able to evidence what it was that we said. We do a lot of work in the UK on public communication. So there are a lot of materials that the government produces for parents to help them in their decision about vaccinating their children. And sometimes people complain about the material. And so there is a process whereby they can complain. They can complain to, for instance, something called the Advertising Standards Authority, which is an independent body that is there to ensure that advertising is honest and true and not dishonest or misleading. So if you see an advertisement and you believe that it is making unjustifiable claims, you can complain to the Advertising Standards Authority, and they are obliged to investigate. And if they believe that you are right and the claims were wrong, then whoever made them has to withdraw them. They're obliged to do so. And over the years, there were occasions when people would complain that our information about vaccines might be untrue. And when that happened, we would be told by the authority that there had been a complaint and that we must justify everything that we said.
Which brings the responsibility, and you can't say or write whatever you want if you don't have the backup part for it.
For sure. And so we would have to provide the evidence for every word, every phrase, every claim, every single piece that we had put in a piece of communication that somebody had complained about. We would have to provide the evidence for every statement that we had made. And that discipline was something that we had followed for many, many years. And when we ask people, what do they want to know? They want to be able to find the evidence that justifies our recommendations. And so that is a discipline that influenced our work for many years. So we could always provide the evidence that justified our statements.
It's like almost in the court a little bit, like the concept of the
It was quite like, I mean, when the Advertising Standards Authority sent a letter to say, there has been a complaint and this is what you do, we knew that we had whatever number of days by when we must have our return. And if we lost, it was very damaging. If we had lost a case, we would have to make changes to all of the material that we produced. There would be a public statement that would be issued to say that there had been a complaint and the complaint had been upheld and that we were wrong. That would be very damaging. And in all of my years, when we experienced these complaints, we never lost one of them.
We have a very punitive tendency in Ukraine, for example, Ministry of Interior to intervene with some medical issues or prosecutor's office, and especially with immunization. And sometimes because of that, doctors are afraid to immunize, for the false allegations later or for some other consequences. How in Britain is all this punitive approach, and are there court cases, criminal cases against the doctors? How it all works?
No, is the answer. A doctor would be much more likely to be held accountable for not vaccinating than for vaccinating. I remember many years ago, there was a case when parents had asked the doctor to vaccinate their child against measles, because that was the time when the vaccine was due. And the doctor created a false contraindication and advised the parents not to have the vaccine. And the child went on and caught measles and was brain damaged as a consequence of measles. And the parents took legal action against the doctor for not vaccinating.
And brought him to the court.
And the case went to court. There have been a very, very tiny number of cases where claims have been made that a vaccine has damaged a child, and they have not succeeded in the British courts.
So very pro-vaccination British courts.
It is not vaccinating that is viewed as more serious. A doctor who does not vaccinate is more likely to get into trouble than a doctor who does vaccinate. The dangerous thing to do is not vaccinate. The safe thing to do is to vaccinate.
And what is now in the global discussion? What are our next new vaccines?
Well, it depends where you are in your vaccine program, because not everybody is at the same place. So, for example, we vaccinate all our children against pneumonia, and we vaccinate all our children against rotavirus, which is a very common cause of diarrhea in children. And so for countries that are not yet doing those vaccines, then those are likely to be the next vaccines. But we're also looking at the horizon of new vaccines that are in development that will also be very important for other infectious diseases that currently we don't vaccinate. There's plenty still to come.
Is there something which is in the final stage of the clinical trials or something like that?
I think we've got a bit of a gap at the moment, and it's going to be about 4 or 5 years before the next generation of vaccines come into use. But it's going to be different for different countries according to their resources. And so there are vaccines used in the UK that may not be used yet in Ukraine. We vaccinate all our girls against the virus that causes cervical cancer. I don't think that is in the program in Ukraine yet.
Not yet.
So when you say what is the next vaccine, the next vaccine for Ukraine may be different to the next vaccine for the United Kingdom. But that's just the way the world is.
And if to come back to polio thing, yes. What do you think is the possible? What are the possible scenarios for Ukraine in future with the polio response and how it all looks in a more European kind of perspective? What will happen to us if we don't have the adequate response to the outbreak?
Well, I think it's pretty easy to say what will happen. The answer is it'll happen again. And if the circumstances that led to the cases that happened in July and August continue, that is, not enough children are being vaccinated, it will happen again. So it's very easy to anticipate that unless Ukraine gets on top of this, the risk remains that it will happen. And so over the last probably 4 years, we have put Ukraine, we, the European Regional Commission, we've put Ukraine as the highest risk country for polio in the whole of Europe. 53 European countries. And that's the whole Europe, not just the European Union countries. 53 European countries, Ukraine was top of the list for risk of polio, because we knew that there was going to be a problem for Ukraine with polio. And if you don't get on top of it now, that risk will remain. And when we meet in June for the European Commission and we review the results and they are no better than they are currently, Ukraine will stay top of the list for risk of polio.
But what does it practically mean? Because for the moment there is the recommendation from International Health Regulation that everybody who is traveling to Ukraine needs to have additional dose of polio. Sure. Everybody who is staying 3 weeks or longer needs to have additional dose of polio. Yep. Disregard is it an adult?
That will stay.
Can it worsen somehow or not so much?
I don't think there is anything. I don't think there are any strictures that are more unpleasant. But it will do no good to the reputation of Ukraine if it is viewed as a country where you could catch polio, because there are very few countries left in the world where you could catch polio, and I doubt that Ukraine wants that on its reputation, particularly as it could be avoided.
In the circumstances like now, when everybody is giving all different advice and there is tons of misinformation and tons of different allegations, what would be your advice to parents? What can parents do for themselves in such a situation?
I do have sympathy for parents because it is difficult. And when you go to get information, it's easy to get the wrong information. if you go on the internet, you can find bad advice often more easily than you can find good advice. And sometimes it looks very compelling. The websites are attractive. The arguments appeal to your heart. As a good parent, do you want to put your child at risk with these poisonous vaccines? But these are poisonous messages. These are not people who are truly looking at the best interests of your child. They're looking to persuade you about their own prejudices, for which they don't have evidence, or they misrepresent the evidence. So the internet is not the solution because it's part of the problem. Social media may be the same. It's very easy with Twitter to get It's very easy with Twitter to get a lot of people to hear your opinion. And your opinion may be based on nothing. So I do have sympathy for parents because it is not easy for them to find the right advice. But the government has a responsibility to be seen and heard with clear and confident voice, telling people what they should do. And equally, the local health provider, the person that you trust, should give you clear and confident advice on what you should do.
The local health provider is as well in this very strange situation.
Yep.
When sometimes his bosses and professors of this university are for it, and the professors of the same university but different branch are against it. What would you advise to the health provider, to the little doctor in the field?
My advice to the professor is, unless you truly can evidence your claims, stay quiet. Because you have the potential to do harm. Put your arrogance aside. Put your intellectual superiority aside. And ask yourself honestly, am I really an expert that I can risk putting people's lives at harm? And unless you are truly expert, leave it to the experts.
We have not so much time left till the end, but still I want to go through a couple of myths which are so much now discussed in media. And one of the issues is that 2 cases are not perceived as an outbreak, are not perceived as epidemia, as we say.
One case is an outbreak of polio,
Okay.
because polio doesn't arrive from heaven. It hasn't come down with the raindrops. It has only happened because of transmission. Mm-hmm. And the problem with polio is that we only see the very, very tiny tip of the iceberg. And the whole of the rest of the iceberg is below the water. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens with polio is you get only one paralyzed person for every 100 or every 1,000 infected people. And the infected people have no idea that they've been infected with polio. They may have nothing. They may have no symptoms. They might have the mildest of symptoms, as if they have got a very mild case of influenza. They may have just a headache, and they have no idea that they've been infected with polio, but they infect someone else. Mm-hmm. So you could be lucky, and the very first infected person could be paralyzed. And so you say, we have polio, we need to deal with it now. You could be unlucky, and you've had 1,000 infections before you get one case to warn you. Mm-hmm. So, to me, one paralyzed person with polio is an outbreak because there were up to 1,000 infections before that person was paralyzed.
Okay.
So one case is an outbreak. Okay. 2 cases, particularly if they are distant from each other.
Like in our case, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the viruses were slightly different, which implies that they had already had a bit of mutation. which only happens because of spread. You had thousands of cases potentially in Ukraine. Your population was lucky that you didn't have many, many more paralyzed people.
Mm-hmm. The other one which is circulating a lot, that it's the vaccine which nobody needs anymore because we will switch to bivalent vaccine in April, and that is just trashed in Ukraine because nobody knows where else to put it. That's the one which is very widely circulated.
Well, that's equally wrong. The reason that this happened was that you had not been vaccinating enough people. And so it allowed this mutant virus to take off. If you had vaccinated more people, this would not have happened. And if you use bivalent vaccine and you still don't vaccinate enough people, it can still happen. It can still happen after the bivalent vaccine. It's nothing to do with the quality of the vaccine or the wrong vaccine being used. It's entirely because the program in Ukraine was in such bad health. You're not just at risk of polio in Ukraine. You're not vaccinating your children against other diseases either. And so your risks are of measles epidemics, of whooping cough epidemics, of more polio, unless somebody takes control of your immunization program, funds it properly, provides sufficient vaccines every day of the week. Every health center has to have enough vaccine for every child who attends.
So interruption is unacceptable.
Of course. Every day that the clinic is open, it has to have stocks of vaccine.
When was the last time Great Britain had interruption in the vaccine program? And
I don't remember when we had to suspend the program.
Just never happened.
We always ensured that we had supply. And part of the way that we did that was to always have an operating stockpile. We always had sufficient in our stores to carry us through either 3 months or even 6 months. If there was an interruption of manufacturing, we would always have enough to keep the program going until more vaccine would come. So we did not have to suspend the program because of shortages. Sometimes we would balance whether it was this supplier's product or that supplier's product, but we always would maintain supply for our routine childhood vaccines by planning, by purchasing, by stockpiling, and by management of our supplies.
And the last but very...
It's not acceptable.
Not acceptable.
Not
Okay.
acceptable.
And the last and very quick one, which I suddenly remembered, in social network, people living with HIV, because there are lots of people with HIV
Yes,
in
of
Ukraine, are raising the issue that vaccinating so many kids with a live vaccine are dangerous for them, for people who live with HIV. How can you comment on that? Because people really raise it
I
a
think
lot.
that we knew the answer to that 20 years ago. 20 years ago, when HIV was increasing horribly, and we worried about people whose immunity was compromised, they didn't catch viruses from vaccinated children. We've known for all these years that they are not infected by vaccines from vaccinated children. I'm sure they have many things to worry about, but vaccination of children is not one of them.
Thank you very much indeed that you agreed to come to this program. We hope you come once again. And the next visit of the Commission is when in Ukraine?
Probably June.
Okay, so then we hope to see you next time in June in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Это была программа «Перша студія» на UA Перший.